Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos Draft Special, brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. Ben Grant, joined as always by JB, and we are thrilled to be back doing the Draft Special, and we're even more thrilled that we are joined once again this season by our title sponsor, Something in the Water Brewing. They were fantastic last year. JB, you and I spent a lot of time there, maybe more time there than we should have, but that was a great place to go pregame and just to enjoy some drinks after those matinee games as well. They did a great job too for our listeners, for Argos fans, everyone that went down there. Not only is it great beer, you're always well taken care of, and it's perfect because it's right there in Liberty Village. It's the perfect place to go after an Argos practice, before an Argos game, after an Argos game, and to have them back again this year. And I know their plans for this year, and I don't want to leak them yet because we'll get into that as the podcast season goes on, and certainly as the CFL season goes on. But they've got some really big plans for this year. It will be bigger, better, and I couldn't be happier that they are once again involved with us. So our title sponsor, Something in the Water Brewing. Look for some great things coming from them, and I'm going to start previewing some of their spring beers as early as next week. So look forward to that as well.
Well, I do look forward to it because I believe you still owe me, shockingly, our wager from the Pick'em. So I look forward to you treating me to a array of those beverages.
I will for sure. I promise.
Mm-hmm. So today we're back, and this is going to be a little bit of a different pod, being the draft preview, simply because Ben has put together a pretty comprehensive draft preview, and I'm going to take the lead a little bit in terms of leading the conversation as we get into it, and try not to get too lost in the weeds, to let you know who we like. It is a very good draft and a very deep draft, and some players that we like, some players that'll fit nicely for the Argos, and we'll see how close we come to what goes down next week. Before we jump into the pod about the draft, I wanted to just touch base. Any Argo fan knows that there have been, serious allegations made involving Chad Kelly and the Argos organization, and an investigation is underway through MLSE about the allegations. And so we are not going to get into that until the investigation is complete and the facts are released, and we have all of the information. And when we do, then we will definitely, have that as a topic of discussion. But it is important that it is going on, and when it is completed, we will engage with it, which is really the only responsible way to handle it.
And it's great that the CFL is running an independent investigation. I think that is really important, and that it is being taken very seriously. That is really important as well. And so that's, as you say, that's something that we'll address further. Not only that, there's a lot of Argos news that we will get into as well, and that's starting next week with our regular podcast. This, as you said, will be draft focused, but we've also got to talk about the coaching staff, the defensive coordinator situation, new coaches added to the staff, as well as a number of new American players that have been brought in. And when we record next, there will be some new Argos draft picks on the roster too. So we'll get into all of that.
All right, terrific. So let's jump into our draft preview. One of the reasons I get excited, as much as I get excited, and one of the reasons I get excited about the draft preview is the Argos have shown over the last 5 years to be incredibly astute at drafting, that they are very good at finding players who contribute in real ways to the team. So some teams' drafts you can look at, and really there's just nobody on the there's nobody that you recognize, but I really enjoy engaging with it because the Argo organization has been very good at identifying needs, identifying talent, finding players that they believe fit their identity. So so it's really great because I think people we talk about tonight potentially could be people that we're watching this year.
Yeah, the Argos are number one in the league and have been for several years now at draft pick retention, percentage of their draft picks that are still on their roster. And so, yeah, it's huge. It's not only that they're able to draft guys who are able to contribute and still are in the CFL, but that get re-signed as well, get extended. And we've seen that in this offseason. We had a double cohort of draft classes up, and a lot of those guys have been brought back again, and some guys that signed big deals elsewhere too, just because they were hits. They were draft picks that the Argos got absolutely right. And this year's an interesting selection of draft picks, especially because of that Jordan Williams trade, which really did mix up the draft board for the Argos this year. So they've got the 5th pick overall in the first round, but they don't have a second round pick. There are 3 third-round picks, and to me, that is where the Argos brass is going to make their money. That third round is going to be like, show us what you've got. Show us the work that you've done this offseason, the work that you've done in this draft, because they've got picks 24, 25, and 27. This is a really deep draft. Like you said, JB, I've put in a lot of work on this. I've forced JB to comb through a 20,000 word document of my draft notes, which I'm sure, JB, you've combed through every single word.
I have combed is a good verb.
But I spent a lot of time on this, and there's no question in my mind, this is the strongest draft class we've had in a long time. And so into that third round, all the way through the third round, I've got guys that I really think will be heavy contributing players. And so that first round pick, I think, is going to be a difference maker type pick. But those 3 third round draft picks, that's where Vince Magri, John Murphy, Pinball Clemens, the whole staff is going to really earn their money, because that's going to be a make or break for this draft class, how that third round goes. And then they don't have a 4th round pick. They've got 2 in the 5th, 2 in the 6th, no 7th, and then 1 in the 8th. So that is the whole draft pick roster.
And don't forget, when you're talking about players, make sure to mention their uniform number, because as you know, my photographic memory of uniform numbers really helps me kind of place them in mind. Yeah,
between my inability to recognize faces and your inability to know anybody's jersey number, it's amazing that we have a CFL podcast.
I couldn't tell you a single Argos uniform number.
I know.
Not one.
I know. Well, that's why we work well together.
Okay, jumping right in. What's an area that you think probably, I won't go so far as priority, because the Argos, despite having lost some key free agents, they're still a pretty stacked franchise, in my opinion. What's an area that you think they are looking to bolster first through the draft?
Well, like you said, there's no immediate need, and most of the teams do have an immediate need. We're like, well, we really need someone here. Not only need, and some teams need someone to come in and contribute right away. The Argos aren't in that spot. They could go into the season perfectly fine with this roster and not have any issue. However, I will say that some of the Canadians that they have are starting to get up there, and I don't mean in age so much, but starting to get up there in cost. Once you get into your 3rd and 4th seasons, it does get more expensive and more difficult on the salary cap, and you have to replace those guys. So that's something that the Argos do have to think about, not necessarily for this year, but we need to bring in guys that are going to eventually be the replacements for these guys that have served for the last 3-4 years and may not be around forever. But there's a couple of areas to me that stood out. We noticed that this offseason, with the trade of Jordan Williams, with the retirement of Enoch Mwamba, the Argos have gone American at the linebacker spot. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of personnel. Wyndham McManus, Jonathan Jones, great linebackers, absolutely can start and be stars. However, I think having a capable Canadian starter at linebacker frees a lot of stuff up. It is harder to find starting caliber Canadian DBs and receivers than it is linebackers and offensive linemen. And so when I started putting together depth charts, to me, that became more difficult, because they've always had that luxury of having, the last few years, having a Canadian starter at linebacker. So I think that if there were one area, that's where I would look. But if they are going to, I think it's going to have to be a first round situation. And so there are two guys that I've highlighted that I think one of the two of them I think will be there at pick 5. And I think that's where they'll have to spend it. Because anyone after, by the time we get to the third round, the Argos already on their roster have guys like Jack Cassar, who are already significantly more talented than anyone they would pick up in the 3rd, 5th, 6th rounds at the linebacker spot. So the first guy is Joel DeBlanco, who I don't think will actually be there at 5, but it's possible. You never know. The CFL draft is weird. There's also a possibility of trade-ups. That happens with some regularity, too. There have been rumors about Edmonton looking to make a deal, too, with that first overall pick. Joel DeBlanco he's the only sure thing in my mind in this draft, and not necessarily a player with the highest ceiling compared to some others, but I think you absolutely know what you're getting. He helped take the Cincinnati Bearcats to the college football playoffs in the NCAA as a starting middle linebacker, and then he played 3 full preseason games with the Seahawks and then spent a year with the Philadelphia Stars in the USFL. And so we know what he's like as a pro linebacker, and he, with very little time, should be able to plug in as a starting middle linebacker in the CFL. And so a player like that gives you possibilities. And now suddenly you can put Witten McManus at the will spot, where I like him better anyway. And Jonathan Jones I really see as a will also. And so, using those two guys, you can kind of, mix and match what you need to. But yeah, I absolutely love DeBlanco's play. I think he's a great run stopper. He's a patient run stopper, which you don't normally hear associated with run stoppers. Like he will wait to fire. He doesn't let running backs set up their blocks. Like they'll look to push in tight and kind of force a linebacker to pick a lane, and he won't until the last possible second. He fires through with amazing aggression and speed, stops the running back in their tracks. He's okay in pass coverage. If there's a weakness, it'd probably be there. He's still, he navigates well through traffic. He's got a good back pedal. He can cover that underneath hole. He can go vertical with pretty much anybody you'd want to. You want help over the top with him in the middle linebacker spot, but you're honestly not looking for coverage from a lot of those guys. So that's a guy I would feel I think maybe gives the Argos some possibilities.
Yeah, I would love. I don't think they have the picks to move. I think not having that second, I think it'll be hard for them to move up from 5.
It might have to be a player.
What's that?
It might have to be a player if they're moving.
Yeah, I don't think they have the currency to do it with the picks, but I would love to go get him. I think that this is a draft that I think the Argos still have the luxury of looking for, like paying big for a star, because they don't need to restock the shelves in the way that some other teams need to. So if there were a guy that was worth trading picks and maybe even a player for to move up, I would love to add him into the mix. You look at 4.59, 40. Like that is elite time for a linebacker of his size. Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a crapshoot for sure at linebacker, I think. But when you look at his pro experience, this was a player who's going to be, I think, he's going to be a CFL All-Star for 10 years.
Yeah.
So if you can add him in at linebacker, obviously. Draft talk sometimes is throwing dirt on the current players, but Wynton McManus is not going to play forever, or even beyond next year, maybe. So that if there was a move on draft night, that would really be exciting. I would love to see if there were a way they could move up to go get him at linebacker. I agree with you totally.
Don't do that to Wynton. Maybe not even next year. I got to see Wynton on the weekend. He looks in fine shape. He's got several seasons left. So don't do that to Wynton.
Abstract concepts to me here at my desk.
The other linebacker that I think will be there for them at 5, and this is an option, is Jeffrey Canton-Arcou from Memphis. The interesting thing about him, so when I first started grading players, this is going back a couple months, he was a guy that I almost dismissed initially because I watched his film and I'm like, well, this guy's going to be in the NFL. But then at his pro day, he ran a pretty slow, by professional football standards, even by CFL middle linebacker standards, a slow 40, a 4.85 40. And just to give you some perspective, like for the NFL, that basically crosses you out as a middle linebacker. For the CFL, American middle linebackers are typically in the 4.5 ranges. Canadian middle linebackers like Ben Hladek, I think, put up a 4.6. Enoch Mwamba was like a 4.7 guy. You don't normally get into the 4.8s. And so that's interesting. But I actually think for the CFL, that may have been one of the best things that happened to the league in terms of this draft, because I just don't see him as a 4.8 player on the field. And some guys just don't run 40s well, but their speed still holds up on the field. He does not look like a 4.85 guy. He's a fast player on film, and I love everything else about his game. So again, like he's got that explosiveness. He's really, and maybe one of the reasons he looks fast on film is he's really good at diagnosing the play early. He's got this immediate recognition, and so he gets away with maybe that lack of explosion. He's also a great tackler, tracks the ball really well. He's got that sort of good shuffle and scrape and then fire through with that explosiveness through the gap to make the tackle and the run. And his coverage ability for a middle linebacker is good. Again, just like I was saying with DeBlanco, like he can carry vertically up the middle of the field. He moves well when zone dropping, and his film on its own was good enough in my mind to get him into the NFL. But that's why you look at a guy like this, and I think if teams can get past that 4.85, there's a risk, of course. But again, in terms of CFL draft, he's pretty much as close to blue chipper as you get, aside from the rarity of a guy like Joel DeBlanco.
Yeah, and I agree with you that I like linebacker at 1. I don't see any point. I don't see any point in taking a linebacker in 3. We don't need any more special team linebackers.
Yeah, there's a ton of them, and really good ones who can step in too.
So it's not an area, like essentially if you can find somebody who is going to become a backup and potential starter, I think you look for that as maybe your top pick. I really like that, and I think that teams often won't look to linebacker. Like that's not necessarily the spot that people are looking for. So maybe in the first round you're able to get a guy at linebacker because that's not the position other teams are looking to fill right away in that first round.
And there are a couple other guys too, sort of tweeners that may fall, like Malik Straker, Arkansas State was a guy. Like, hey, actually, that's one of the many guys that you and I both coached against in this draft, which is that's always fun to see. But yeah, he's a guy that again struggled a little bit with speed numbers, but doesn't really look like that on film. He may drop, and that could be a guy that you kind of wonder about, but he's sort of in between positions. I don't really know what he is, and so that may scare some teams away. He reminds me, remember how Dexter McCoyle was used a couple of years ago, where he wasn't a starter, he was never listed as a starter, but anytime they went to those 3-down lineman packages, those 3-4 looks, suddenly there was McCoyle, and he was playing at like an all-star level. He was on the field more than some of the starters were, but in that package, he was perfect. And so like a guy like Malik Straker could be someone like that. There are a few guys down there too. Nick Weeb's another guy. He was injured at Saskatchewan, didn't get to test, was injured in the playoffs. And again, with the lack of urgency for the Argos, if they're looking for next year, maybe that's a huge steal if he drops to the 3rd round too. But, other than those sort of guys with an asterisk next to them, you're right. There's not really much there for, unless you're talking about the 1st round.
So moving forward, if I look at the roster and the number of Canadians on our nationalized players, one area that jumps out at me is defensive line. That the Argos have cycled through. They had a fair amount of Canadian defensive linemen, but they've sort of moved on and moved them out of the program, and is clearly an American focus at defensive line. Where do you see defensive linemen in this draft? Who are some potential inside guys, rush guys? Who do you see in the draft as being a guy that the Argos can add to a largely American room?
The rush guys are tough because I think most of the Argos draft spot doesn't really fit up well. Like most of the guys that, like, I'm thinking like Luke Brubacher, Daniel Opoko. Well, actually, Opoko's an inside guy, but he's going to be long gone, I think, by the time the Argos get to the 3rd round, and they're not going to spend. I just don't see them spending that 1st round pick on a defensive lineman. But a lot of those guys will be gone, and so most of the rush guys I like. just aren't going to be there. One guy they may have a shot at, if you're looking at outside guys, is Jason Janvier Messier. And you and I were talking about him earlier. Do you like the idea of taking a guy from a small school? He's a player or not small school, but like a school that was sort of irrelevant on the U Sports landscape, like York. How do you feel about taking a guy? Because it's tougher to evaluate a guy that's playing on a team that is hard to watch.
Yeah, I think the potential is there for a steal, much like if you watch the American draft, and sometimes teams will take Div 2 guys, which is, used to be really uncommon and now is a little more common. And sometimes even Div 3 guys can jump off the page at people. I do think it is, you can see potential because obviously, like, no disrespect to York. I know that usually means you're about to disrespect somebody when you say that, but that it's not a top program. It's not an elite program. You may feel like the level of coaching and training and preparation that there's still untapped potential. So if you see potential on a player on a not very good team, I think that's a great place to get a steal. If you look at the big schools, obviously everybody's looking at the Quebec schools, everybody's looking at Alberta, everybody's looking at Western. You might have a chance to find a diamond in the rough here. So I that's where I like it. I like that idea of bringing in somebody who has terrific measurables and talent that you feel with professional coaching, you can really see a jump from where they were at York.
Yeah, and he's fun to watch too. Like, he's explosive out of his stance. He's got really good bend, balance around the edge, good speed. He kind of tries to avoid, like, once he gets the problem with him, and this is where he can maybe add some strength. He's only 232, 6'2", 232. When he gets engaged, he has trouble disengaging. He has trouble getting free, and that's something that he would have to work on. And so more physical tackles do give him trouble. But yeah, he's absolutely got CFL talent. And York finds guys like this, right? Like, as much as that program has struggled for their entire history, there's always a ton of CFL guys from York. And so he's another guy. He will be drafted for sure. And I think he might be there for the Argos in the third round. So if they're looking edge, that would be my pick, I think, because I just don't think any of the sort of elite sure thing edge rushers will be there after their first pick at 5. But he could turn into something.
Is there an inside guy you like?
Yeah, there's a couple. Kyle Sampson's kind of an interesting one to me. He's a UBC guy, sort of a run-stuffing nose tackle, 6'3", 290. He was injured at the end of the season, and so he wasn't able to do testing, which I don't love, but that may allow him to drop a little bit too. He's a guy that will almost certainly be there in the third round. He at the pro day where he was testing or measuring up and stuff. He did the bench. That was the only thing he participated in, and got 34 reps up, just to give you an indication of his strength. He's a beast of a man. And he's a guy that can also two gap. You can put him out there. You know how the Argos love that 3-man set, and you've got Oakman often in the middle just taking up bodies. That's something that this guy can do as well. They let him two gap in U Sports, not necessarily something that he'll immediately be able to do in the CFL, but yeah, he just has the mass to absorb double teams and really be a threat at stopping the run, especially when you don't want to devote that many bodies to it in those three down lineman sets. He stands out.
I'm an absolute, and have been, I'm an absolute sucker for bench press as a measurable for defensive players, because obviously you like players to be strong, but it is the one area that you have to dedicate time to. To me, it is such a metric of commitment and focus and discipline. You can't, it's like flossing your teeth for an hour before you go to the dentist. You can't lift a bunch of weights on Wednesday before the combine and be ready to lift that weight. Like, that means you're talking about months and months and months of heavy training to be able to put the bar up that many times. And I just think that speaks to, a sense of character and commitment. So I love it as a metric, and that really drew me to him as a prospect.
And he's got really quick feet for a big guy too. You don't have a lot of 300-pounders with quick feet, but he can actually sidestep. There's some fun games to watch of his on film where you're not used to seeing a guy that's just about to be double teamed actually like avoid blocks, like sidestep blocks, because he is that quick. It doesn't have a perfect skill set. There are some problems in his game. He's an awkward tackler for one. He seems to, I don't know what it is. Like for as big a guy as he is, he just doesn't ever deliver punishing hits. He seems to, and this sort of speaks to his grip strength, I guess, as a positive, but he grabs guys and hauls them down or falls down and brings them down on top of him. It's not sort of, his tackling is odd. And he gets gassed quickly, but a lot of those guys do. He would be a rotational piece. And so I think he's a nice third-round target. Another guy, Samuel Obiang from Towson, similar build. He's 5'10", 301, put up 20 reps in the bench press. He was a nose tackle at both Texas State and Towson, and would play that same position in the CFL. Now, he doesn't have the pass rush that you get from Samson. Like, Samson can actually get some pressure on the quarterback. Obiang doesn't really have that. He is a good run stopper, but he's sort of a little bit of a one-trick pony there. Often in pass sets, he gets curious and he's starting to look in the backfield, and then he can get put on skates pretty easily and march back. He'll also get washed out against double teams sometimes. But I do like him just as a giant mass when you're expecting run. That's a guy that I'd like to have on the field, and I think a guy that will fall again will be maybe one of those third round picks. And if you're looking for value later, a guy I love out of McMaster, Mitch Price out of McMaster, I think he's going to be there like 6th, 7th. He was a guy that tested at the Ontario Combine but wasn't advanced to the National Combine. I love his film, and I love the measurables too. Another guy that excelled in the bench press. So he's 6 feet, 273, a little lighter than the other guys, but at 6 feet is a mass. Put up 30 reps on the bench press, and another one of those guys that he's got that lower body strength. He can avoid getting moved around. He can also sort of forklift guys off the ball. He has the strength, the play strength to finish it through. One-on-one, he just does whatever he wants. When he's left one-on-one with guards and centers, he throws them out of the way. He's another guy that, for his size, has excellent foot quickness. He can take on double teams. He can sink them. He can free himself. He still needs to get better hands. I'd like him to develop a better arsenal of moves off the line. But yeah, he can be a real nice run stopper. Needs to just do a little bit of a better job in terms of pushing that shelf back in the pass rush. But I like him as a late round pick, a guy that I really think can play in this league.
We can tell that I have been driving the car so far, as we have focused solely on defense. Offensively, with Curly Gittins gone. Where do you see the Argos finding some talent in the wide receiver category? Because obviously that's another position where we're looking for players to develop, players who are able to to contribute on special teams. Is there anybody in the wide receiver area that you think is, probably not a 1, but could at 3 can be a potential contributor?
There's a couple guys. This was such a strong group. It was the most fun group to watch at the Combine. I loved watching these guys. They impressed at every stage. They for the receiver group, you don't normally walk away from like the bench press impressed with the receivers. These guys you did, and they put up good 40 times. They were great in the one-on-ones and in the team stuff. The receivers were fun to watch. So there's a ton of guys to choose from. I'm not convinced they wouldn't use that first round pick on a receiver though, because there are options there. One in particular, Kevin Mittal out of Laval, is to me an elite prospect at receiver, and he will go in the first round for sure, but he may slide if those linebackers get taken early. There are a couple other options. There are a couple linemen that might go early. He may make it to 5, and I think Kevin Mittal is pretty much everything you want in a prospect. He's 6 feet, 230, had 20 reps on the bench, and the thing is, he came into that combine when he measured in. Everyone's like, 229, like 6 feet 229. He's not going to be able to move, and he puts down a 4.5 40 and under 7 seconds in the 3-cone. And so he's not only got the strength to put up 20 reps on a bench for a receiver, he's got the size at 230, and you know how that contributes to a player's blocking ability too, and he can on the move be a real problem. But to put up those speed numbers is highly impressive, and he can play anywhere on the field. At Laval, he was primarily a boundary slot, but when he did line up on the line of scrimmage, like as a split end, his release was effective. So you could put him at Z, you could put him at R. I like him at R, the third receiver to the field side for the Argos. I think that's interesting because you can take advantage of his full skill set. You know, he's got the full route tree that he can use. He's a really good route runner. Uses speed beautifully because he kind of lulls you to sleep and then will explode out of a break with that strength and explosion he's got. He's really tough for DBs to stay with. He's smart. He can find space, but you can also use him on jets, and he's a good blocker, and you get that size from that R position. He's going to be going up against linebackers. He's going to be, chipping on defensive ends, and he's not going to shy away from that at that size. But yeah, he can run those bubbles and jets and everything else too. So a tactical route runner like that with that kind of size, speed, I love. The knock on him, and this drives me up the wall for film. He carries the ball in one hand so often. He doesn't do it, in fairness, when he's in tight and in traffic, but I absolutely hate seeing players running down the field palming the football. That just, as a coach, it's too much for me. So I want him to develop some better ball security habits, but it's there's not a lot to pick on in terms of Metal's game. So if they are looking first round, he would be really the only guy, I think. There's a couple guys that maybe they'd have to trade into the second, and we agree that trading to the first is probably not going to happen, or trading up in the first is probably not going to happen. Trading into the second is possible with all the picks the Argos have. There are a couple guys there, like Nick Mardner is a physical freak, and he was at Auburn most recently, but also was just like an all-star at Hawaii. Put up huge numbers. Went to Cincinnati, wasn't quite as effective there. Really did nothing at all at Auburn, but 6'6", 208. He ran a 4.52. He doesn't look as fast as that on film, but those long strides at 6'6" can be kind of misleading. He still has some development to do to his game. Like, he doesn't use his body to its full advantage. He doesn't get that body lean in tight. He could be more physical coming out of his breaks, using more chicken wing or whatever to create separation, using that body. He doesn't really play like a 6'6" receiver at times. He does when he's going up to get the ball, and he's elite at that. But he could be a guy that actually gets some NFL interest, and the Argos are in a position where they could see him fall out of the first round into the second. They may say, well, look, maybe it's going to be a year before he comes up here. Who knows? We don't know if he'll even sign as a UDFA in the NFL. But with that kind of side, like 6'6", as a receiver, runs a 4.5, I think he will probably get some attention. So maybe he slides into the second round. The Argos can take a chance on him. Maybe he ends up in camp next year or later this year. Who knows? But those guys are interesting.
He'd be a player where obviously it's hard for you not being able to interview players. Like, he would be a player, I would think, the interview and background checks would be massive for.
For
there
sure.
are some, there's concerns. There's concerns that he's played for a couple of different schools. There's concern that the production, didn't go up when they moved, that the production doesn't match the measurables. Sometimes those concerns, are for legitimate reasons, right? So it's really hard to know with him. I think you're right. I think he's a fascinating person. If the interview, if you pass the interview and if you feel like there are, reasons for where the production went down, I think he would be an amazing player to try and move up for, because that's a real home run swing. If you get a player like him fully motivated and ready to play, like that's a first round star.
Yeah, and he wasn't at the combine, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him at all, but I'm sure teams have done their homework on that and have been able to set up meetings and have a better sense of him than I do, certainly. But yeah, I have no idea. But there are, like you say, on paper, there's some red flags. And so, is there anything to that? And if the Argos feel like, you know what, this guy checks out, then I think he could be a real steal if he slides. But maybe someone else gambles on him in the first round. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to jump ahead here into what is probably the most common area for drafts, and is offensive line, where the Argos are actually, I won't say shockingly, but really comfortably, incredibly pretty set. They've done a fantastic job building that room, which is great. I think that opens up picks that other teams have to use on offensive linemen that the Argos do not. Is there anybody that you would think about taking at 5? And who do you like maybe in the later rounds from the offensive lineman group?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough call because there are 3 guys that I love at 5 on the offensive line, but is it worth it if you could get an upgrade somewhere else? It depends how the draft starts out. Like, it depends who goes. Because again, like, I think if one of those 2 linebackers is there that we talked about, then I think you do go maybe that direction. But you always want to keep the shelf stocked in terms of offensive linemen.
You never go, wow, I wish we didn't have this great offensive lineman.
Right. You can't have too many. But the thing is, like, the Argos, it is a little embarrassing. They brought back their entire offensive line from last year. 4 of the 5 of them are signed to long-term deals as well. So it's not like there's an immediate need there. Like, Isaiah Cage is the only one who's signed sort of short-term, but they've got great backups too, right? So when you're looking at, you have to draft a guy who's better than Giffen, a guy who's better than McKellar. If you're looking to, and in the first round, do you draft a guy who's going to be your 8th or 9th best?
I think
offensive
round
lineman?
1 for me is too rich, but I do think, maybe 1 in the 3rd and maybe 1 in the 4th. Makes sense because you can take some shots at players who have, that if everything works out could really be something.
Hear me out on a first round lineman though, because there's Kyle Hergel is a guy that I would love to see the Argos take, and he might not be here this year. So he was one of the best offensive lineman in the NCAA's, Boston College guard, but 6'2", 315. He's really limited in size for the NFL. I think he's going to end up in the NFL, I would guess, for at least this year, maybe a little bit more. But I had so much trouble finding flaws on tape for him. He was, again, you look at him from a CFL perspective, he is a blue chip guard. And I think actually had him as the highest graded player on my board for film grade alone. I knocked him back a little bit on my board. I think I have him 3rd overall on my board, and that's even with him maybe not being in the CFL for a couple of years because he was that good. And for a guy that isn't huge, he didn't have the problems that come along with that. Like, he doesn't have any trouble anchoring. He really doesn't allow any penetration. If there's anything that I want to see more from him in his game, maybe a little bit more explosion from him in the run game. But he's got everything else, just great balance, great hand placement, perfect hand placement, I think. And he's just really smooth in his footwork, his recovery. He would be a guy that, if the Argos are one of the few teams that could afford to take him in the first round, because like I said, he's probably not going to be around for a bit, but maybe that fits really well with the Argos timeline and the opportunity to get a guy just kind of like like Ryan Hunter. He comes to the Argos years after drafting him, and how great was that?
Oh my! I mean, you and I have talked about that. That is the unspoken. That was the trademark TSN turn point. That's the move that I feel like changed the trajectory of the Argos.
And he could be that for a couple of years from now. So is he worth a first round pick? Like, I think that is.
I'll be honest. I'm not. There are guys I like. I like the linebacker. I like the receiver. But there's nobody I'm in love with at 5. So I if he doesn't go, would you take him even if he was drafted? Or if he were drafted?
If he's drafted, no. But I don't think he's going to be. I just don't think he's got, because he can only really be a center in the NFL, and there just aren't many of those jobs. There's 32 total. There aren't a ton of teams looking for starting centers, and there's max of 32 backup centers that are on practice rosters. I don't think he's going to be in the NFL for long.
I could, yeah, I like that. I like that at 5. I do. I'm not there. There's nobody that I'm enamored with. Obviously, I would love to go get the linebacker, but they're not going to be there at 5. So,
A couple
I,
other
I think
guys
I
that
think that's
would a couple other guys will be there later that are interested. Well, so Nathaniel Dumoulin-Duguay is another guy that I think you can consider at 5, but I think again for the Argos needs, it may not outweigh some of the other possibilities. But I love him too, and he's a guy that maybe he could play tackle. I think he's probably a guard though in the CFL. But there are some really interesting third round possibilities for offensive line. I would be stunned if the Argos don't take an offensive lineman in the third. I think one of these two guys I'm going to talk about here will fall. So Daniel Johnson is one. He played at Purdue, 6'6", 313. He's tough to evaluate because there just isn't a lot of film on him. He's had really tough time staying healthy and getting on the field. So his film is really fragmented. You have a couple plays here from this year, a couple plays 2 years later after that. When he is on the field and when he's not trying to overcome an injury, I'm really confident in his ability. He's just, for that size, 6'6", 313. He's got amazing flexibility. He's got great length. He's got that strength too. He's able to create leverage for such a tall guy too. He gets underneath the opposition. He can gather guys really well, lock them out. He's just got great play strength to go along with that arm length as well that comes with that 6'6" body. Really moves well in space, and he can get outside too. Like he's not a guy that tested fast by any means. His 3-cone suggests that there's no agility there at all, but he doesn't look as lumbering on film, and so he'll be a guy that I think is there in the third round. And why not take a look at a guy like that has that, Purdue's no joke of a program, and 6'6", 313 is no joke either. I think he can play tackle. So again, it's not an absolute need. If he's there in the third round, I think you pull the trigger for sure on a guy like that.
Well, I don't see how you can't if his getting reports almost no athletic ability at all.
Well,
I think anytime you have a chance to pull the trigger on that.
Are those my words?
Isn't that what you just said?
No, I didn't say he's got no. He didn't test mostly, but his 3-cone is like 8.06, which isn't great. But he doesn't look like that on film. He's not. He's a massive man, but he's got the potential to be a tackle. And I think again, we're talking third rounders. We're not talking a first round pick. I think there's real potential for him there. And then the other guy, and I think he'll be possibly here in the third round too, is John Bosse from U of Calgary. 6'4", 335. He was one of my favorite players to watch at the Combine. So he's got 36-inch arms. So to go along with the 6'4", 335, he holds it so well too. He just has a real athletic build. And then 36-inch arms. I think he probably slides inside to guard. I wouldn't rule him out as a tackle though, just because of that. That length is huge. Like in one-on-ones, he did get beat a number of times initially, but that arm length, he was able to recover and react. Like so many times, I was during the one-on-ones, I was right behind that group on the first day of one-on-ones, and one after another, I kept thinking, oh, he's going to get beat around the outside, and then he would sort of go gadget arms and just shove the guy into the ground. He's got great strength, and you know how difficult bench is for guys with longer arms. 25 reps on the bench with 36-inch arms says something. And so for a guy that he's going to need time, like he's not going to be, I don't see him being on the field this year, but for a third rounder with these kinds of traits, he's also got a great attitude too. I found him to be highly coachable. Again, hanging around over that group, I'm able to hear what they're saying, and just the way in which he interacted with the rest of the players that were there, the way he interacted with the coaches. He's a guy that I really would have, liked to have on my team. I think that there's the possibility of developing into a starting right tackle, and at worst, I think he's going to be a starting guard in this league once he gets a little bit of time. So third round or one of those two guys.
For me, my dark horse or later pick is Owen Mueller from Windsor. I always fall in love with a road grader when it comes draft time. I feel that you can teach. Well, I mean, I'm sure people disagree, but I always feel like pass pro is so technique based, and run blocking is instinctual. Either you have that mean streak in you or you don't. And I love his run blocking. I would love him to be the extra lineman you bring on the field for running plays. I think that that's a nice niche that he could fit as he works on some of his other techniques. He's a massive human being. He's strong. I like him. If you could score him in the fifth round, I think that would be a really nice positional player that you might put into the mix with we talk about that like in those later rounds. I think you're looking to find somebody with a specific skill. They're not, if you go in the fifth round or the sixth round, you're not going to be a sort of an all-around, well-rounded athlete. Like I think what you're hoping for is a very specific skill that they do really well that you can potentially use on your roster. And I think his road grading, run blocking for me qualifies him for that.
Yeah, he was on that Windsor team that they were so impressive this year, and they've got three guys coming out on the line with he, Morgan, and Una. George Una he's going to go in the first round, I think. With Morgan and Mueller, I think more guys are. I think people are higher on Mueller. He'll probably. Maybe Morgan goes ahead of him, but I could see someone taking those guys in the second or third just because everyone, like people love the nastiness of the offensive lineman, right? And those guys, all those Windsor guys have that where you hate playing against guys like that. Peter Nicastro's got that where, Bladek was like that too. Philip Blake's got a little bit of that.
A couple of years ago, I think he was at Western maybe. I'm trying to think who it was, who I loved. And he went earlier than I thought too. And again, it was, he was just a mean SOB.
Yeah, just did not mind getting his hands dirty. And that's, these guys are all like that. So someone could fall in love with those guys. Mueller, I think I could see that. And so he may not even make it to the Argos in the third, but he's one of those guys who could fall because there are questions about pass pro. And so CFL being such a pass heavy league, it's possible. But yeah, if he's there late and
that's where I hope, because if I'm a team, I think that the Argos are in a position being pretty complete at offensive line, that they have the luxury to kind of boutique shop. I don't know if I can put boutique shop and Owen Mueller in the same sentence, but finding this sort of very specific talent because you don't need him to do the other things because you have that, where other teams may not feel that they have the luxury to have this sort of one-sided player who probably is not going to be on the field unless the pass pro unless they feel the pass pro can really improve, because that pass pro is tough. It's like learning to be a dancer. It isn't just something you can practice and do. Like it really is something that you have to have the natural rhythm. I really feel that like it has to be something within you because it is just so hard to do. It's just not something you can rep and do. It's why the offensive linemen are so hard to find.
Yeah,
because the pass pro is such an elite, like flexibility and balance in such a huge package. The dancing hippo.
But the Argos are a team that can afford to spend a year developing a guy that isn't maybe elite in that category yet. And I think like you said, like
that's my hope. Maybe he drops because teams look at him being a little too one-sided.
And you can't teach the nastiness side. Like you either have that or you don't. Like you don't learn to play with grit and with mud. Like that's not something that you can be taught. You just have that. But the pass pro, you can, and or at least that's our theory. So
well, what's that? The Parcells line. If they don't bark as a puppy, they won't bite as a dog. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's covered quite a bit. Defensive back, another area. The Argos are shorter on Canadians or a little thin on Canadians. Not an area that traditionally Canadians play a lot of. Defensive backfield is still an area that the Argos, we talked about in our podcast, sort of our off-season podcast, is an area that is a little thinner. Do you see anybody in the defensive backfield who potentially, like, I think there's actually starting positions or at least quite a bit of playing time available at defensive back, more so than almost any other position.
Yeah, it depends what the Argos want to do. Like traditionally the Argos have just had the safety. as the Canadian, and everyone else is American in that defensive backfield.
Yeah.
They have some possibilities though, because like we talked about during free agency, like bringing Tunde Adeleke in, and you've got Royce Metchie. Well, you kind of think both those guys are going to be on the field. So are you trying to build up two Canadian spots? I don't really know, and it depends. Like I don't know how they're planning on using Quincy Moget as well, not Canadian, but is Adeleke going to be a Sam? Are you trying to make the Sam spot a Canadian position? I think that's tough. I don't think there's a lot of Sam players in this draft, for example, like Malik Straker we talked about earlier. Maybe he's one of them, but there just aren't. I'm not sure he's got the speed for that. I don't know that that's the strategy, and I don't really see the Argos as a team that's going to have their field corner be Canadian. I just think they found so much success with American corners. There's a billion of them, right? You can find there are so many elite American corners. Like, why not keep that position American if you can? Because they're so good, and the Argos seem to be really good at finding those guys. So for me, I think we're probably looking inside at the safety spot, and maybe you're looking at a, I don't even know if you're looking at a halfback or anything else to go Canadian. But there are a couple of guys that stood out to me, and I don't think early. I don't love the DBs early in this draft. I actually don't love this DB class in general. I don't think there are a ton of great DB prospects. I wouldn't take any in the first 2 rounds probably. I expect 2 or 3 will go in the first 2 rounds. Ben LaBrosse, everyone loves because his measurables are fantastic. But I think he can only be a corner, and I'm just not sure that's in the cards for me. So guys that I like that I could see maybe slipping to the 3rd round, Christophe Beaulieu was my favorite defensive back. I actually had him ranked 14th overall, but I think I'm probably higher on him than most people, and I could see him slipping into the 3rd round. What I love about him is he looks like an 80s computer game, a guy that can run just as quickly backwards as forwards and has no pause or stop when you change directions. It looks like something's gone wrong. He's just so effortless. His back pedal, how he's able to seamlessly transition from a back pedal to an open turn and then a full out sprint. He's great at jumping routes. He's got elite change of direction and explosiveness. He can use kick slides off his back pedal and sort of maintain hip leverage. He's aggressive. He attacks hooks, comebacks, digs. He's as pro-ready a man cover defender as you find in this draft, I'd say. He's got a little bit of room to grow. Obviously, the Argos don't play a lot of man, and so this is not a plug-and-play defender, but a guy that at almost 6'2", almost 200, with good speed, can play some specials, can learn the position. So Christophe Beaulieu in the 3rd round, I think, is a guy that you probably pull the trigger on and kind of figure that out later. Maybe the plan for him is safety long term, and I think he could play that position just fine. And so he's traditionally a halfback, played halfback at Laval, but I think he could be a safety. So 3rd rounder, that's where I'm looking. After that, I think you're taking some late stabs. Maybe in the 5th round, Jackson Sambach out of Regina. I actually don't remember we both loved Eric Colonna last year out of Queens. We thought he could be a safety. Another guy that we both coached against, and we know the fire that guy had, a gym rat, and nobody picked him up and I don't think he was even in a camp.
Just did not have the measurables.
Yeah, and that's what I worry about. Like with Jackson Sambach, 5'8", 195, he reminds me a lot of Colonna in his build. Similar play. I think he's a slightly better player, though. And if he's there in the 5th round, that would be someone that I might think about. He's just so solidly built. And for a guy that's like 5'8", 200, you're thinking like very sort of fire hydrant, 4 square. Those guys don't usually change direction well. He does. He ran a 4.61. He's got a almost 7 flat on the 3 cone. He moves well. He's also got really good route IQ, situational awareness. He sees concepts that are trying to set him up. It speaks to his film study, his preparation. He does gamble a little bit, but I kind of like that in a safety, a guy that's going to make quarterbacks think twice and hesitate. And I think because of his height, like we saw with Kelowna, maybe he goes undrafted, maybe he slides all the way to the end. But yeah, as a 5th round guy, I think that's where I would find him in somewhere around that 5th round. And I would just say, you know what? Yeah, I know he's 5'8", but let's see what he can do, because he at Regina was a heck of a football player.
I think in this category for me, again, I was not really taken with anybody. I did like watching Daniel Bell's violence and his acceleration into contact. I don't know where he plays. I know we talked about not needing another special teamer, but I think that he could be an elite special teamer. So like in the defensive back area, I like him as a late pick. His measurables are not great. But when sometimes that doesn't matter, because like, sometimes, we had a player at our school who couldn't lift 120 pounds, but hit people with the force of a train. So like there's not always a direct correlation between how strong you are and the speed that you're able to generate in terms of contact. And he has that. When you watch it, he has that shoulder pad clack when he connects with people, and that's something that always draws my eye. Like, so I like Daniel Bell as a special teamer.
I think he could turn into something too. Like he's going to probably be a will linebacker long term. So he was a DB.
I think it's another small school thing too. Like he's out at Mount A. He doesn't have as many eyes on him. Wouldn't have as much opportunity to be scouted. So maybe you're able to steal somebody, where if he were at Western or UBC or something, maybe he goes a little higher.
And he mentioned at the combine that he wants to play safety, but I think if teams see him as a will, if you look at him, you watch his film and look at his measurables as a will, suddenly you're like, well, that's kind of interesting. And so like my initial watch, I wasn't actually that high on him for film. I thought he was intriguing. But when I started thinking about him as a will linebacker, I'm like, there's something here. Again, it's not an immediate plug and play. And that's, we're talking about later rounds.
I love his tracking.
Yeah, for sure. And you get him out in coverage, but you also get him run stopping. And you talk about that hit, the pop that he's got. He loves contact. Like, this is a guy that loves football, clearly. And so I like him if he slips late. I think that for sure could be a guy you take a chance on. Dawson Marchand's another guy. Like, you can probably get him in late rounds. There's a few guys like this that I think you can kind of be creative with, who can be really good special teamers for a year or two, and maybe learn the position. And so, yeah, if he's there late, I think people may fall in love like you did. People watch that film, I think they may see something. So Bell may not make it that late, but yeah, a guy like Marchand, maybe he's there late. So I think there are options late for DBs who start as special teamers and see if there's something there positionally.
Now, offensively, as we kind of work our way through it, hopefully, people more than our parents still listening. Offensively, we haven't really touched on quarterback or running back. Is there anybody you would take there as a developmental player? They're not rich categories, and often are not, truthfully, in the draft. Neither one is a place where necessarily Canadians have reigned. What do you think about quarterback, running back? Is there anybody worth? I'll even throw a fullback in there too.
Yeah, so quarterback, no. There just isn't. I think you're going to end up with a couple guys that are camp arms, guys that I did like, but I just don't see it. I just don't think that they're going to have enough to compete. There's just not the consistency there from like the two guys that we had, or three guys that we had at the combine. Great players, great quarterbacks, but I don't see pro quarterback in any of those guys. So I think probably you have a few guys that end up at camps, but I would be surprised if any quarterbacks are drafted in this draft. Fullback. Let me just address fullback before running back, because it's a similar thing. There are a couple really good fullbacks in this draft. I don't see the Argos taking them because they're not first rounders and they'll be gone by the third. And so, like Ben Hladek's brother, who I think has a real chance to be a player, in this league. I think he probably is long gone by the time the Argos pick in the third. And it's just not worth it for the Argos value-wise because Coach Dinwiddie doesn't use fullbacks like at all. He doesn't the Argos have had elite full, like they had Declan Cross who like did nothing. He caught like one pass in the 2 seasons or something. Like it wasn't quite that extreme, but it's just not part of Coach Dinwiddie's offense. And so you don't want to spend draft capital on the guys, but the fullbacks that you do want in this draft, the ones that aren't being drafted in the NFL, there's a couple of Canadians that are going to be drafted as fullback tight ends in the NFL, Theo Johnson and other guys like that. But the ones that will be drafted in the CFL won't be there in the third, and it's not even worth a third to the Argos given how they use them. Running back's a different story though. There's 2 guys that I want to talk about. So Matthew Peterson's the first guy, and I think he slips to the third and could be an option for the Argos there with their 3 picks. He's actually the guy I have ranked highest of the running backs. Most guys have Michael Krzyk, who tested amazingly well, and another guy that you and I both coached against and gave us all sorts of trouble, as you remember. Like he was a problem.
He was a problem.
Yeah, and I just don't like. I don't think he'll be there in the third, and I'm not sure how well his game translates because even in college he was used very sparingly. He can do amazing things like his 40 and his size, like awesome, and maybe he turns into a special teams stud. But I just don't think he's for the Argos. But Matthew Peterson, he doesn't quite have the measurables there, but Matthew Peterson, I think, is a more than just a special teamer. I think he could be a contributing factor. And if the Argos want to go Canadian at the running back position down the road, I know Kadeem Carey is obviously going to be sharing backfield time this year with Adeboboye. But like down the road, if you want to go Adeboboye and maybe one of the guys in this draft, there's 2 options. Matthew Peterson is one of them. He had a great year at Alberta in his senior season, 8.3 yards a carry. Obviously, that's pretty good. He's quick-footed, has elite vision. He's got enough speed to pull away. He's not going to take it the distance. He's not like a home run threat, but enough speed to put together some really big runs, which he did at Alberta. And he's got a lot of those Adeboboye traits. He keeps his engine going the whole time. He can make a defender miss, but he'll power through arm tackles and fall forward, make it tough to finish. He's also one of the few backs in this draft that's really good in pass protection. So that immediately drew my attention. So I like him a lot. And then a guy that you could probably get in the 5th round, Michael Herzog, who I think is actually the best pure ball carrier, but I think the reason he may slip as far as the 5th is he's 5'8", 201, and I think people look at that and they're like, 5'8", do I want somebody who's got to pick up blitzes and protect my quarterback at 5'8"? Can I have him out there? Like, how often can I have him out there? What does that do to his draft capital? But yeah, another guy that we coached against that gave us nightmares. I think he scored 3 touchdowns in a game when we played against him. But yeah, at 5'8", 201 is a really interesting runner. He has elite vision, finds open field no matter where he is or where the open field is, he'll find it. He's got great explosiveness, agility, change of direction. He does a really good job setting up blocks as well. Like he's another guy that he'll get right in tight to his own offensive lineman. And at that size, he's so difficult to track and he's baiting you to choose a direction and he's always going to go the other way. And so as a change of pace back, pairing him with a guy like Adeboboye down the road, that's pretty interesting. You love the Thunder Lightning combo. Here's a Lightning that you can probably get for a steal in the 5th round.
Is there anybody well, first of all, I would say, are there any tight ends that Hamilton might take first overall?
I don't see it.
I do like to look out for the Ticat fans. So
I still love laughing at that. We were so stunned when that happened. I could not believe that pick. No, and again, certainly not certainly not on an Argos podcast. The Argos just do not make use of that position well enough. So
give me a name of a player that is, that you haven't mentioned, or maybe you have. Give me a name of a player that you would just be over the moon if the Argos drafted him.
It depends on.
We're gonna watch the draft on Tuesday. Give me the name of one player where you will just feel like that was a job well done.
Well, okay, let me go. I'll go sort of like a dark horse here. So. Nicolas Gendron from Ottawa. This is a player that is not high on, I don't think, anybody's board, but I think he's higher on my board than I'm sure on most people's, and I've still got him pretty late. But the more I watched of him, the more I thought, like, I don't quite know what to do, but I think that he's the kind of guy that you want on your CFL team. So he was Ottawa's leading receiver on the field, but also off the field. Ottawa, a team that lost like two of their best receivers. Is it early in this? I think it was before the season even began, and he sort of stepped up and became that leader. And what I like about him too is that his film looks nothing like his measurables. Like there's some good and some bad in that, but like the way that he plays, he's he was a boundary slot, sort of big bodied. And I didn't think he would test anywhere near as fast as he did. I thought he would test. I thought he would measure up a little taller and a little bigger. He's 5'11", 194. I was sure he was going to be over 6 feet, over 200 pounds, because he just plays like that. He plays with this mass, and he plays with an intensity. And he was able to run the 3-cone 6.88. He's got some real speed measurables to go along with a play style and a play strength that suggests you're dealing with a much bigger player and a stronger player. And so, for me, as a pass catcher, I don't know. I don't know if he's a guy that makes it onto the field, but even though he looks nothing like him, there's a lot of Tommy Neal in Gendron, and I think there's a lot to like. You watch Tommy Neal play, and you're like, oh yeah, I can see totally why the Argos drafted him. Now Neal is a starting caliber player, and I don't think I see that in Gendron necessarily. But a lot of those same traits are there, and so when you combine the 3-cone and the 40 and the size and the play strength that he has, he can work on his route precision. He can work on he rounds corners and doesn't really explode out of his breaks. That's something that he can improve on and get better at. And maybe he's never a starting player, but he could be a real difference maker and an attitude that I want to have in training camp and in the locker room.
All right. Where can, sort of wrapping this up now as people are I think probably,
waking up the next day still listening to our podcast.
People are pretty sated with their list of players they didn't know before. Draft is on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday.
Yep. The draft, it's always after the NFL draft. And so it's Tuesday night at 8:00, and you can actually watch me live through 3 Down Nation. JC Abbott and I are doing a live draft show, and that's something that, absolutely tune in. We will be covering the entire thing, and so you'll be able to follow along live, and you can have the ticker up as well. And as every pick comes in, JC and I, we have gone through this extensively. We're talking about hundreds of players, and we're excited to talk about all of them. We will give you analysis of every single pick that comes in. And so if that's your bag, if that's what you want to do Tuesday night, draft night, absolutely tune in. But it's possible after this podcast, you never want to hear anyone talk about the draft again. But if you are still listening right now, you are my kind of guy that needs to be there Tuesday night. So check out 3 Down Nation. You can find the live stream there. And John Hodge will also be doing, he'll be blogging for each pick as it goes along as well. So a lot of ways to follow along. JB, I know you will be tuned into JC and I all night long for the 4-hour
if there's a live
run.
Stream that I can jump onto after the TSN coverage, I'm always keen to do it. I can never remember if we talked on air or not about my CFL draft plan to make it more exciting, but
I don't know if we ever did. Give us that before we sign out here, since it's just you and I now.
Exactly. So my thought was always, with these picks, that if you're only going to do, say, the first 2 rounds, that every team should try and design the most exciting way to deliver their pick, whether it be skydivers or flame-throwing, elephant-riding clowns, potentially, water skiing, downhill ski jumpers. I think the potential for how you deliver that pick is through the moon. And, I think people would really be into watching what teams have come up with for how they deliver their pick. I'd love to see it, especially since you don't have the players there and you don't, so you have the freedom. I would love to see the extremification of the CFL draft.
Well, maybe JC and I will have some skydiving on our live stream. We will have to see. You'll have to tune in Tuesday to check it out.
So what are we doing with as I hand back the wheel? Thankfully, I hand it back to you, and I give you control of the pod once again.
Yeah, well, we'll be back next week. We're starting to our weekly podcast next week, and we'll start with a draft recap and get right into the news. And there's a lot of Argos news to talk about. So we'll probably record that next Wednesday night. Give us 24 hours to recover and analyze, and go through the draft and look at all the Argos news. And then training camp is right upon us, and so we will be into our weekly pods after that. Well, that will just about do it for us on this draft special edition of the X's and Argos podcast. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.